So for this session, we're going to be looking at fit to standard analysis and fit to standard workshop. Two things: fit to standard analysis and fit to standard workshop. Now, you guys have done very well in identifying the current process. You've also identified the processes that are fits and that are gaps, but it doesn't end there. So let's look at what this whole process is all about. Now, we have said that the fit to gap methodology is used to identify areas in which the newly planned system, or take note, guys, the newly planned system or business process for your organization fits or doesn't fit according to needs. So what it means is that if we have identified, so basically it's used to identify those areas that doesn't fit. Just like you have in your assignment, you have identified the gaps and the fits. It basically determines the component that fits into the business goal, in quotes, the system that you want to implement, and the gaps that need to be fixed. The gaps that need to be fixed. So the question is, for your task, all those who identify gaps, the next question is, how do we fix, for example, how do we fix this gap if this is a gap? Normally, there will be a column here that says description. So I would have to move this here because I'm using this as an example and just say this is a gap. I think I also have someone's work that already has this well defined. Okay, so that is gap description. Yep. So what do we do? How do we analyze? What do we do with these gaps? That's the next question. That's where we're actually heading to. We have done a very good job. We have process mapped. We have identified the systems impacted. We have identified which one is a fit, which one is a gap. And if you want, we could have added, I think this is something we can add on Excel. I think we will look at how we're going to, I think it's where is that stuff now? Conditional table, I believe. Let me see. Should be this one. No. Yep. So format tables. This is going the other way. Okay, I think. Let me see. Awesome. So I formatted this table. If you check here, if you drop here, you're going to see fit gap. So if I remove all the fits and the blanks and say, okay, it's going to sort all the gaps. So I now have all the gaps. So the question is, how do we deal with all these gaps? How do we analyze them? How do we sort them out? So make sure you add your own conditional table so that it's easy to sort out, right? And that's one of the beauty of using Excel. We have other applications that can manage this actually. We have Azure DevOps. We have some other applications that can help you do this job. So we have filtered all the gaps. How do we deal with this? How do we analyze them? How do we solve them? Because another thing is, when we say traceability metrics, you have to also prioritize these gaps. So when we say must cow, we say which of these gaps is, in the scale of preference, which of these gaps are must have, which of these gaps are nice to have, which gaps are we going to be packing. So it's based on your when you have identified this gap, you have to have another session with the key users and say, look, of course, that might be a high-level business decision. Identify those that are out of scope, identify those that the system would need to do some customizations, identify those that are integrations. You have to also make inquiries on how that integrations will happen. You also have to discuss with the functional consultants and the technical guys on how to close some of this gap. But we'll come into that. But the question is, how do we analyze this gap and how do we close them? It's something that must have to happen. So that's what the fit gap analysis is all about, basically. Now, as part of the explore phase, particularly after the process and requirements recording, take note, there's a comparison with SAP standard or a specification of the target system and a detection of deltas. So what does this mean? So let me just put something here so that it will also guide us. And keep. So let me do this. So if I see SAP or Sage, because of the task we're working on. Yes. So now what does this mean? It means that, like I was telling you guys, right, after you have you've successfully documented the requirements and the processes, the gap is a comparison between SAP or Sage standard processes versus, so versus the what we call deltas are the standard required, the fits. So you have to compare, what the target system is and what the deltas are, or detection of delta. So what it means is that since we have gathered the requirements, we now have to check if those requirements, if the system we want to implement, if the requirements are, meet with the system requirement. For example, create invoice is one business process. Can we create invoice in Sage or SAP? If that is a yes, so it's a fit. Example is make automatic payments. So currently they do automatic payments. You now go to the system. Can we make automatic payments in the system? If it's a yes, it's a fit. So that's what you have to check. You have to compare between the current process and the targets of the target system, and of course so deltas are standard processes. Gaps are things that do not fit into your standard processes. After the basic and framework conditions have been clarified and prepared in the discovery and prepare phase, the requirements are determined and the company's internal circumstances are analyzed. So internal circumstances are your assist processes. So when you have done, we're done with all those phases, we now have to check, right? And we have already done all those jobs in our assignment. We have identified that these are gaps. These are gaps, not deltas. We have identified the deltas and the gaps. Deltas are fits. Gaps are processes or systems that do not fit into our target system. Now, what's the purpose of this? Is getting to know the business model. One of the reasons why we do fit to standard workshop is to understand business process, understand the business, understand their model. Secondly, is to analyze business process and existing data. Why we also do the fit to standard workshop is to analyze all the end-to-end business processes, end-to-end. All those questions you were asking were all to get information around how does the business currently work. So you have to do that. Then projection onto SAP best practice and processes. So best practice is standard process. So what it means is, for example, if we're using SAP already has a standard way of working within the system. So you have to make sure you project that standard. And that's why we do what we call the I said it earlier, where we do a process walkthrough. So you show them how the system works. So they get to appreciate where those gaps are, even as you're showing them through the process. Then there's also definition of requirements and necessary data preparation. Of course, you have to prepare for testing, data migration, and what the requirements are for data. So what's the process of doing your fit to standard workshop? So you have to determine the deltas. Determine deltas are compiled in a backlog list, so-called the t-shirt sizing, that's all the terminologies. And a decision is made as to the extent to which the topic should be considered further. If a decision has been made for further consideration, feasibility studies and application context of design may follow. Now, what it means is that you have to determine what the deltas are, what are the fits, and what other decisions will need to be made in terms of the gaps, right? And like I said, for you to do a fit to standard workshop, you should be somebody who understands the system, because there's no way you're going to identify a fit or something is a fit or a gap without you understanding the system. It's just like if you're not a tailor, you cannot measure somebody and sew a cloth for somebody if you don't have that tailoring experience, because that's how it works. So what he was saying here is just identify the deltas, um, put them in a backlog, right? Backlog is that there are list of activities we need to do, and we have to prioritize them. That we're also going to learn. How do we prioritize these gaps? Okay. So when to use a fit to gap analysis? You might need a fit to gap analysis for your organization for any issue that arises. So it mustn't always be around implementing a new system. So even when the system has gone live, if there are issues that have arisen in any, whether it's process or systems, you can use the fit to standard and fit to gap analysis. Right. So let's see some of the uses, where we can, so we will discuss some of these common, physical problems that the business can run into. So one of the uses you can use the fit to gap analysis is to identify fits and gap in your ongoing business process. So you can implement this fit to gap analysis even in your life, really. You can implement that in your family, you can implement that. So it's basically looking at what aligns with the goals and what is outside, what is not aligning. So some of us, we have, of course, financial gaps in the sense that there are things we want to do, but we have to prioritize whatever needs we have. We have to prioritize the resources we have, because we might not be able to do everything we want to do, right? And there are some requirements that are coming to us that does not fit into that our financial goals. So we have to, pack them one side, and that doesn't fit to, that's a gap that doesn't fit to so you can use fit to gap, for to check ongoing processes. You can use that fit to gap analysis to figure out the root cause of gaps. Very important. Once you have identified the gap, the next thing is to how do we close these gaps? To analyze each gap concerning its degree of severity on effect, prioritization. So all those gaps we have listed, we have to prioritize them. Like I've said, very, very important. And we'll see how we're going to do that. To rank each gap depending on the degree of importance. So you have to prioritize according to the severity of the effect. You have to prioritize gaps according to their degree of importance. You have to also record all information, to record information of all the gap attributes in the system, such as SAP, to make desirable changes and updates in the decisions. So you have to there will be a lot of decisions about those gaps. Like I've told you, you're going to discuss with the business and make certain decisions on how to manage those gaps. To decide which system to keep as a working standard in the organizations, which one do we discard and which one do we keep? Which process do we discard? Which process do we keep? That has to be discussed. So what's the so if we say we are doing a fit to standard workshop implementation, what are the processes? First, you have to do a process consideration. So you have to, since you have gathered all the requirements, you now have to do what we call a process consideration. After a process consideration, you need to do a process demo. And that's what I was talking about. So now we have gathered the requirements, we now understand the gaps. The next step will be to do a demo of the process. The next will be to do a comparison of the SAP or Sage best practice with the current customer process. So that's where you will have to compare the process for that. The reason for that is to identify the gaps. And of course, the next is definition of configuration, organization structure, authorizations, data preparation. Once you have identified these gaps and you have determined how you're going to close them, the next thing we'll move to is configuration. So the functional consultants and technical consultants are actually waiting for the BA to conclude deltas and gaps, standards and gaps, so that they will start picking the standard process and start configuring while you're doing the analysis for the gaps on how to close them. So once you are done with that comparison, the fit to standard work, the fit to gap assessment, then configuration starts. Then once configuration starts, we have to pack all the delta requirements. I think delta requirements here is referring to gaps. I keep using the terms interchangeably. So we have standard requirements and we have delta requirements, which we can also call gaps. Yeah, deltas are things that do not fit into what what the standard is. Forgive me if I misuse that word. So delta requirements are gaps, and we have to take them into the RISEF backlog. We're going to learn what RISEF is as we move on. Now, the following steps, are basically what you go through when you say you have done a fit to standard workshop. So when you say you have done a fit to standard workshop, it means that you have done process consideration, you have documented all the process, you have done a process demo to show them how the system works, you have done your fit to gap assessment, you have identified the gaps, you have reviewed the gaps, you have reviewed, you have reviewed the gaps, and you have entered those gaps. The next thing will be to do the configuration and authorization and data preparation. And the next thing will be to use RISEF to close those gaps. So these are the processes you go through when you do a fit to standard workshop, basically. Just 1 minute, guys. Okay. Okay, so basically, the following steps have been established um, in a future standard workshop. Well, of course, these are considerations you need to follow. But one thing we need to understand is during this process, during the future standard workshop, you have to encourage discussions about how process fit correct customer requirements. So there will be conversations, right? Because and in this process, your negotiation skills will have to come up very strongly because there are processes the client might want to keep, but you have, as an experienced BA and also somebody who understands the system, you feel that it's going to create more work for the business. It's going to require more resources for the business. So you have to explain these things, right? That it might also affect the timeline of the project. So there's so many considerations. So you have to encourage discussions about how these processes will fit the business requirements. It's a very tasking job. So you have to make sure that yeah, concretization of target system. It just means that you have to make sure the Sage or the QuickBooks the Sage or the SAP you're migrating to, you have solidified the foundation for configuration, because once you have gathered the fits, configuration should start. Once you have identified the fits, configuration should start. Then you have to, so that's why we have two things happening here. So after you have done your process, your comparison of SAP best practice with current business process, two things happen side by side. First is you have to start defining the configurations and all the needs, all configuration needs, not just configuration. You have to identify the organizational structure, the authorizations, data preparation, and everything you need. And the second is you need to come up with a delta requirement. You need to identify the gaps that you have identified. How do you close them up? Sorry, just give me a second. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So this is the idea, this is the process for the main aim of the fit to standard workshop. I hope it's very well understood. So the first is process consideration, process demo, comparison of best practice. Immediately you have so guys, as you have identified these fits, so if I come back again and I filter again for fits, so if I come here and I filter for fits, all these fits really. So the once you're done and you've come up with your business blueprint, the functional consultants will start configuring the fits, because if they fit, then let's start configurations. It is the gap that will take some time. For the gaps, they will have to, it will require some more discussion, some more decisions. So these gaps, we will pack them in the RISEF documents and make decisions around those gaps. But once fits are identified, configuration and everything should start. And that's the job of the functional consultant. So you see why the BA is very important, because if you do not do this work well and you do not ask the right questions and get the right answers, these guys will configure something wrong. So it's very, very important you understand your role as a BA. It's a very central role. You are the interpreter of process and documenter of, if that is correct, of process. And that thing you have documented is a Bible that the functional consultant will use to design the system. So you are the one providing direction for configuration. So your role is extremely important. I think one of us who the person who got a job recently, that should be Chinon. So we're talking over the week. He was like, wow, it's like the BA job is even more tasking than the functional consultant job. I said, well, it's not that it's tasking, but you have to make sure that the functional consultant has what it needs, what he or she needs to actually do the configuration. So there's a lot of meetings, conversations, negotiations, diplomacy, because for you to come up with a fit and a gap within in that space, there are conversations, there are negotiations, because in a real project you see that the users might insist, say something what they like, the management will send another message. You have different messages here and there. So you have to coordinate all these tasks. And you need to know the system so that when they say what they want, you can say, this is what the system can do. However, if you want this, we have two options. We can use RISEFs, or we can do integrations. However, we have to pack this and look at it in the backlog, put it in the backlog and start prioritizing and looking at how we're going to. But you have to be very vocal, very courageous. You have to know your system and know process. It's very, very important. So and the last is, ideally customers should be allowed to actively work in the system if necessary. This can also be part of the planned workshop. So one of the things that will happen is early in the project, customers should have access to the system, they play around with the system, so that when you're doing your process walkthrough, customers will appreciate what they are seeing. But if they are seeing it for the first time, then you have a lot of, then one of the projects I did, that was the major issue. We did not give them sandbox to play around with because it wasn't available. So when we were doing the process walkthrough for the first time, there were lots of, and they would keep saying, we didn't know this, you didn't show us this. Why? There were lots of issues because they did not have access to the system before, the process. And that's one of the arrangements we're actually also making for our projects I will update you on. So let's look at workshop basically. So you can see that one of the things you need to provide is a sandbox system. So for this to work, users have to have a sandbox system, like a demo system they're going to be using to play around with. And that demo system will have a model company, just like we have here. I want to show you SAP, but let me see if I can do that. Let's see if I can log in very quickly. So it doesn't look, some of us have not seen it before. I think I have, can't remember my password now, but let me see. Let me see if I can borrow. Um, Please, can you send me your photo? I think I have it. I sent it to you, sir. But I don't have that number again. I don't know where that number is. Okay, please, can you send me your password? I don't think I remember it. Let me log in and check SAP. If you can hear me, please confirm. I think where is that thing now? Okay, let me see if I remember this one. Oh, awesome. So guys, I know I've been showing you Sage 1 class, but this is what SAP looks like. Um, and so what we're saying here is that, let me bring this slide. What we're saying here is that they have to have access to something like this, like a sandbox, where you can be playing around with the system. So, for example, if I go here and I go to accounting and I go to financial accounting, these are the core processes in finance: accounts payable, accounts receivable. We also have controlling, supply chain, project systems, and a whole lot of other modules. If I go to, so what you're going to do, if you're using SAP to do the process walkthrough, you say, welcome users, this is SAP. In SAP, we have so number of modules. In this module, you can do this. Then you can actually post a transaction to show. So it's a very, so when we say process walkthrough, it's just to take them around the system, do some tasks from some sample transactions, and just show them how the system works. And of course, when you're showing them, they're going to be asking questions. Those questions should be documented, and it will form part of your understanding of the current process and the gaps, right? So you can just walk through the system and show them. So these are all the transactions that you can do in your general ledger. In your general ledger, these are transactions you can do in your accounts payable. These are transactions you can do. Same if you want to also do this for Sage, it's the same thing. You go to Sage, walk them through. This is home, these are dashboards, these are quick view, these are customer transactions. So end to end, kind of show them how the system works end to end. So that's what it's a very important session. That means that as a BA, you should also know system. So let's look at the fit to standard in a project using the explore phase. Now you see prepare phase, where we do scoping, project planning, preparation, fit to standard workshops. We plan for that. We have done all this. We have moved to the explore phase, where we're actually looking at the fit to standard workshop, identify delta requirements. Delta requirements are gaps. So you have to identify and make key decisions about them. You have to prioritize backlog. Backlogs are, so when you have all these requirements, just we have in Excel here, we have to pack them somewhere and start dealing with them one by one according to their level of importance. So all these gaps, we have to create more columns here. Now, I'll teach you, when you see the fit to gap analysis, you see a document. We'll pick all these gaps and start treating them one by one. You see, all these gaps do not have the same level of importance. Some might come some might come after go live. Some are very severe. Some are must have. Some are should have. So you have to make sure you prioritize them and handle them according to their level of severity and according to their level of importance. That's the analysis side of fit to standard. So that's what we'll be doing here in most of the explore phase. Then we move through this circle complete. So once we have identified the fits, configurations we need to do documentations, set up the dev system, and start configuration. So some of you will be doing configurations in the system. So like I said, it's going to be a learning for all of us. Some of you will train, some of you will configure, some of you will test, some of you will document a lot of things, but that's how it's going to be. Then we have to do a solution walkthrough to show them, okay, we have done some configuration. This is what the system will look like now. We have considered all the gaps that you raised. We have made sure that the current system has, we have dealt with all the gaps, and this is what the system can do for you. Then you have to do a sign off of that phase. Then you go to the realize phase, where you have to set up a QA system, move all your configurations from the dev system to the QA system, do a testing, do data cleansing, do string integration, do a lot of things, do design and end user training, do operations implementation, cut over, and the phase, then you deploy. So this is an end-to-end process of what happens from the prepare phase to the go live. And we're going to be seeing all this really in the project we're going to. We're going to be following these steps as much as we can. So of course, the result, this is just looking at the results of Fit to Standard workshop. One, the impact of the new solution on existing process is known. So of course, the users and the business knows exactly what to expect when the process ends. Target system specification configurations are done. So that's one of the results of the Fit to Standard workshop. Process is known. Configurations are being made. Gaps are documented and backlogged. Users are aware of value creation and KPIs. These are some of the very, very important reasons why we need to output of the Fit to Standard workshop. Now, the very important document, which we call the functional specification document, I'll rush through this, is how we close gaps, right? So the functional documentation document is a document that outlines the functional requirements for an implementation or customization of an SAP business function or IT business function. It typically includes detailed description of business process that will be supported by the implementation, as well as specific configuration and customizations that will be required to support those process. In summary, what FSD does is to identify those deltas, those gaps, and do what we call implement what we call RICEFs. So if you look at the word RICEF is an acronym. It could be spelled WRICF or RICFW, right? So RICEF means that when you have identified the gaps, you need to identify how do we close this gap, what tools or what process are we going to be using that's available for us. Some gaps will be closed by workflows. Workflow means that if that gap is about authorization, who should authorize what and who should not authorize what? What is the workflow? When you create an invoice, where will the invoice go to for authorization, and who will sign off before the person can pay? All those are about workflows. And workflows are gaps in every project. You must see workflows. So one of the job of the BA is to identify these work authorizations throughout the project, throughout the requirements. Who will be doing what? Who will be signing off what? And remember, workflows are tied to user authorizations. So you need to identify all the users, what their rights and their privileges will be in the system, because before you can come up with a workflow. So that's one major task that will be done even in our current project. We have to identify all the users and their roles, and the privilege and the rights they have in the system. That's what will trigger. That's a gap because your current system might not have that, but the new system you want to implement will need that. Second is reports. One of the things we always see as gaps are reports. Sometimes the users have certain reports, the customized reports they need to do their job. They can say that a certain tax authority will need a report in a certain way. Auditors will need reports in a certain way. Customers might need reports in a certain way. One agency might say, one insurance law might be passed and say, for you to get social license, you need to prepare a report in a certain way, right? So report is also a gap that you find most likely in projects because these are specific requirements and sometimes it's specific to country. So you have for you to close gaps that are report related, you have to customize reports. So as a BA, you have to identify what those reports are the format they will be in, get sample documents. You have to also liaise with the functional consultant and technical consultant. And most times you might have to come up with an FSD to be able to close that gap. The third is interface. Interface are like thought integrations, right? And or how the system sends message from Sage or from SAP to another system. If you have such requirements, for example, one of us had a requirement around sending automated message. That's an interface. Or somebody says you third-party system. There's a gap already. So for how do you close that gap? You have to investigate further. Most times you have to communicate with the vendor of that system to ask for the requirement of that system. So you have to ask the vendor, does your system integrate with social system? What are your, there are some technical jargons. What are the APIs? What are the requirements for you to transfer your data to another system? What portal do you need to open and all that? So it's a whole lot. So gap is something that takes time to close. The other one is conversions, how to load files, upload files from one system to another. You might need to capture conversions. You might need to, if you have those gaps, you have to use conversions to close them. Then enhancements. Enhancements are most likely you're going to get them in every project. Sometimes you need to make changes to certain transactions or to certain documents to accommodate certain things. So you can have an invoice in the system, but the users have said that I need a column here to do certain thing for me. I need a column to track, let's say, VAT numbers. I need a column to track, um, you know, let's say withholding tax numbers or something, just to track something extra. So you have to do some enhancements. And forms, customer forms, vendor forms, VAT filing forms, all those are requirements that need to be do all these will so your gaps, all the gaps you have identified will fall into one of these RISEFs. So your gaps might either be workflow issues, report issues, interfaces, conversions, enhancements, and forms. So if I go to this gap here, for example, you see approvals. Once I see approvals, I know that this gap falls under workflow. If I see approvals again, so these are workflows, authorization workflows, payment method can be enhancements. Internal audits, tracking. So you can see most of these gaps will have most of the gaps, what will close them out fall within this. So you can have, I think one there is report, one is workflows. You might also need interfaces. For automated things, you might need to do an enhancement. So you have to classify those gaps according to this template, according to these, what we call RISEF documents. Once you identify them as what they are, then you're supposed to engage with the relevant stakeholder to close them. Some gaps might not be closed. Some gaps will require third-party applications, which will also fall under interface. So you have to identify who that third party would be. Some gaps, some interfaces or third-party applications might not be compatible with your current system. So this is a whole lot of discussions. It's a whole lot of conversations, and that's why I'm trying to. So when you do requirement gathering, this is one other side. Handling those gaps is, I think we're done. Handling those gaps is something that is very, very important that we need to look at. Now, how do we do the gap analysis? So let me see if I have a sample document, because we're going to do that. So sample document we have here, fit to gap analysis. So let's look at this template. So for all these gaps, I'll show you an example, then we'll take it up from there. So I have a sample template here. And here I'm going to also add a column. I'm going to add action. I will add, maybe I'll add here. No, let me add here, RISEF. So this is an example of gap analysis, right? So first, so I'm going to, if you look at this example, I'm going to use this example and I don't want to delete this one. I want to use this example to, I'll pick one of Tamomo's stuff and use this. So we have here who approved this senior accountant. So we have here insufficient number of approvals. So when you have these gaps, you have to now go to the users and discuss further. So I'm going to say the focus here is uh, so let me say, so so you have this. Then you can say current state. So currently you can say only one person approves. So that one person is, I think, what the Tamamo put here. So you have to make sure you gather all this information. Who is that finance manager, senior accountant? I think they've closed, This guy can be very funny. So here, so different gaps so senior accountant, future states, you need 3 approvers, at least 3 approvers, and those should be CFO and accounts officer and MD, depending on the value. This is the two. MD, of course, you need to come up with an approval metrics that says for the first 100,000 MD, for the second 100, for the third 100,000 this. Then of course, if you look at this, if you want to rate this gap, I think I'll just say this is, instead of using, okay, I'll say this is, so you can see that what is here is 1, what we need is 3. So this is like a 50% or 75%. The gap rate is 75%, if you like. Is here for us to do what we use to close this gap in RISEF is workflows. So we'll say this needs a workflow. So we said workflow because in closing gaps is workflow you use to attend to authorization issues. Then what's the severity priority? We say this is very high because you need people to be able to approve. This is an internal control risk. So this is high. When do you hope to start this job, start this activity? You can say, I hope to start this on the that's the 22nd. Let me just put this here, whatever. Okay. And when do you hope to end this? You can say this, you can say plus 45 days. So this is when you want to end this. The resource, who will you need to do this workflow? You need the HRO and Finance. Then who is the process owner for this? Of course, this is process owner in the business side. So you can see this is, let me see what Tamomo used here. Who is responsible for this? If you had a responsible person, then it's easy. I can just pick it. So you don't have a person responsible. So Tamomo, please fill up this line for person responsible. There's a reason why we did that. So fill up your line for person responsible. So let me say Frank. Status. So you can say not um not started. Then you can put any notes you need to put here. So this is what we say. This is how we do gap analysis. So you can also add here before notes. You can say process owner. You need to add more columns here. Let me add another one here because so you might need to say technical process owner. We on the business, so say no, say IT. Say this is for you. Here you say consultant. So here you say consultant. The consultant who should be involved. So here for the technical team, you can say the person here will be John. The person that will also be supporting you this on the consultant will be supporting you to this, it got in. And why you need to document this is you need to know who to go and meet to be able to close this gap. So now you have this gap. So the next thing is since you have documented it, what do you do? Very simple. You need to go to, let me do that scenario. So now you have identified the gap. So what's happening here? So this is you. So you have the gap, right? So you need to take this gap, meet with the functional consultant. No, first, discuss this gap with the business to make a decision on priority. So if they say they have said that the gap is severe or is high, so you have closed that, fine. And of course, you have also confirmed that the gap is within scope. So you take this gap to the functional consultant to understand the system requirements or configuration requirements. And also, you might have that discussion at the same time with the technical guys to understand we have said that it's a workflow issue. So to understand the workflow or technical requirements. So and you have to document all this. So the technical guy might go back and say, tell the functional consultant to design what we call an FSD. So the functional consultant will do an FSD, send back the FSD to him. He's going to work on the workflow. Once he's done, he's going to test it. So he's going to test. Once he's tested, he's going to pass it back to the functional guy who will test. Once the functional guy tests, you might be in these meetings anyway. Once the functional guy tests and is okay, he'll pass it back to you as the solution is done. Once you're okay and you've also tested, you now communicate back to the business to say, yes, this workflow issue is now okay. Can you test? So once business tests and is okay, business will sign on. Is this understood? Understood?
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, is this, at what point is this? Is it after the system has either gone live or is it before then? Does this
No, not
still
gone. We
pass?
have not talked about configuration, talk more go live. So this is
And so how are
before,
they testing it?
this
That's what I'm
is,
saying. How are they?
we, no, so remember, if you look back here, let me take you back to this note. Remember, I said that in this process, these guys, when you're done with your comparison and gap and fit will go, to configuration, gap, you need to start working on closing those gaps. Remember, and all this work is currently being done in the dev system. It has not gone to production yet. Okay. It's still on the development system. So as the functional guys are configuring the system, you are getting their attention on how to close the gaps. Do you understand? So yes, what I've shown you now, yes, what I've shown you now is as it's something that happens at the explore phase. So as they are configuring, you are also doing your own work by bringing their attention to the fact that there are some gaps they need to close. And you have identified those gaps. You have made sure that the business is okay and is within scope. You can also discuss that with the project manager. So you have to also discuss with project manager to confirm that this is within scope. Once it's within scope, you have to meet with the functional consultant to confirm system requirements. With this, to advise you, okay, yes, it's within system requirements, blah, 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 blah. Then he will take it up and do what we call an FSD and take it up with the technical team. The technical team will now configure, do some technical setup, do some programming, do some workflow setup. And if it's done, technical team will test, send back to the function. They are all testing in one environment, which is the dev environment, which has not gone live. So everything is happening in the dev environment. Any other question? Is it clearly understood? Please make sure if you don't understand, please let me know. But if it's fine, please say it's fine. I don't want anybody to keep quiet. If it's fine, raise your hand, say fine, type something. I want. Yes?
We're still trying to assimilate it, all these things are being new. And, now we still need to go back through the videos again for us to really understand more. Yeah, so it's just the first time that he's trying to, because when you explain, you just come up with words and all that, meaning it's already there in your head. But yeah, it's just, some things that, some columns that we need to be thinking, but you just say what it is and it will just come in. So we're still trying to digest everything. To my own understanding, I don't know about others, but to me, that is how it is, because I need to go through the videos again and really know how it is. And for the assignment you always give, it also help again, because in terms of doing the assignment, we get a better understanding and knowledge about it again. So awesome. It's all good. Yeah.
Awesome. Any other comments? All good, all good. Thank you very much, Jerry. Thank you, Ike.
Same thing until you play one plays the video again before you get I think a more understanding on what as it is now. I'm not grasping it fully until I go back to the videos again. Yeah.
Awesome.
I always take my time to play the videos again.
Yeah. Awesome. So thanks. Okay, guys. So when you play the video again, I mean you get it clear. But the most important thing here is that take note that those gaps that has been identified need to go through some gap analysis. And this is a sample of the gap analysis. And I've said that once this is put in the gap analysis, you have to engage this guy. You have to engage this guy. You have to engage this guy to make sure that they close this gap, because you see here, status, this thing has to go from started to done. And if it's not done, it's delaying the project. So your job is to make sure that the people who need to know about this gap know about the gaps, and they are working on closing that gap. That's all you need to know. That the summary of all I've said is that these gaps are blockers. And for you to close them, you need to apply what we call RISEFs. So those gaps can fall within forms. They can be gaps for forms. They can be gaps for workflows. They can be gaps for process. I've said that. And this is the process you go through basically. So once the ones that are fit, you have to move them. Of course, those will be documented. Then the ones that are gaps have to be handled, analyzed, and there has to be some follow-up on how to close those gaps. The next thing we'll look at next week is because I want to also give you some time this week. What we'll look at next week is the documentation of all this. So next week, when you come with your gap analysis, we're now going to do what we call the fit to gap assessment document. So the fit to gap assessment document is a document that will summarize, not just summarize, but carry everything you have done in your requirement gathering workshop. So you're going to carry the level 1 to level 4. It's going to carry your business process flow or diagram. It's going to carry the assist requirements you have documented. It's going to carry the fit to standard analysis, and also carry some more information. But I will teach you that as a whole topic next week, how to prepare the fit to standard or fit to gap assessment document. That document is very important. It's when that document has been signed off that the functional consultant and technical team will start configuration. They will not sign off your Excel, this Excel you have provided. They will not sign off they won't start working because the Excel has been signed off or the fit to standard, the fit to gap analysis has been done. They will sign off when you have prepared the fit to gap or fit to standard assessment document that will carry everything around this process. Once that is signed off, the next process starts, which is they have to come up with a configuration file that has to do with all the things that they need to configure. They need to come up with, start doing data migration. They will start doing planning system integrations and all that. But we need to get to this point where, so by next week, which is when our project is starting, we'll discuss that as we move on. By next week, I expect that we should have come up with a fit to gap assessment document. I'm going to teach you because you will do it in this project. And be reminded that you will also do a system walkthrough. So I will need you to, next week we'll be very busy. I know it's also a Christmas week, but as much as you can. But the most important thing is that we'll start having conversations. You're going to meet with the let me wrap this up. So just make sure that you do your fit to standard, finish your work. If you have not finished, some of you, I made some corrections. Please review those work again and finish. Then the next thing you're going to do is to come up with all the gaps you have identified. If the gaps are many, it will be interesting, right? So you need to tell me, first of all, go through the RISEF, the video again. I'm going to also share that RISEF document for you to read it. Go through the documents again. This is very important because you need to tell the technical team whether this is a workflow issue, whether this is a customization issue, whether this is an integration or interface issue, because they'll take it like that. Then we now move to the end. Then just give me this gap analysis, right? And I'll be very impressed. Then next week we're going to do the fit to gap assessment document that will be a summary of everything, both the things about what the modules we're configuring, how the modules will be in the system, how the fit to standard, the output of the gaps, the gap analysis we have done, the process that are in scope, the process that are out of scope. That document will carry everything. And that document needs to be signed off before we start configuration, because that is an authority for you to start configuring the system. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, guys, for joining this session. If you have any questions, that's why I said you can really not do much if you don't go through the session again. If you don't take your time, sit down, play the video, write these terminologies because you need to know them, research more about them. I've used a lot of terminologies. I've used RISF, I've used functional specification, I've used a lot of these terminologies. You will need to be saying these terminologies even in your interviews and even at work for them to actually know you know your onion, you know where you're coming from, or you know what you're doing. Right. So if you don't have a note about all these classes and a brief note that summarizes what you have learned and key things, then and if you don't take your time to go through the videos, you will have issues when we start the project. Really, like I said, so please take your time, bring out 30 minutes every day. I don't think it's even though you're working, bring out 30 minutes every day at least. Play the video for 30 minutes. If you play 30 minutes on Monday, Tuesday, by Wednesday, you should have finished all the video basically. And not more than 2 hours. Then start looking, understand it for your own good so that you can be able to transfer, so that it will show when we start our conversations. So thank you very much, guys. I'm going to switch to the second session of this class, and that would be about our upcoming project. So I'll have to stop recording and have that discussion privately.